Message. Talk about contagion after Greece, Portugal, and Spain this week began with bond markets deserting Italy, and now one of the credit rating agencies downgrading, we mentioned Greece, but Ireland's status to the equivalent of junk bonds. Meanwhile, the world has watched all week the very public, very protracted haggling over who will pay to sort out the mess once and for all. There were, 8.5 hours of talks among eurozone members. Monday, more discussions. Tuesday, among EU finance ministers. And as we've just learned, another crisis meeting postponed until next week, according to EU diplomatic sources. This, as Germany and France argue over how much private banks and institutions should pay. So, who should pay to purge Europe's crippled public finances? Could the eurozone even collapse? By the way, it's not just Europe where an almighty row is giving everyone in the markets the jitters. Washington faces an August 2nd deadline to stop a default there. What does it all say about the general attitude of citizens on both sides of the Atlantic to the issue of debt? Today, in the France 24 debate, while Europe burns. And with us to talk about it from Brussels, Eric Brice, Associate Professor of Finance at the University of the French West Indies. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Also with us, Philippe Darvisonnet, who's the Head of Economic Studies at BNP Paribas. Thank you for being with us. And thank you as well to Tariq Mouakil. Thank you for coming back with us. Tariq Mouakil, the author of Asset Markets, Portfolio Choice, and Macroeconomic Activity. It's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
But where you espouse Keynesian economics, that is to say, the government does have to play an active role in all
this crisis, in this current crisis, I think so, yeah. It's.
Go ahead.
Do you want me to continue?
No, we'll talk more about it in a minute. Okay. We'll first of all tell you that there's lots to talk about, and there's lots also that you have to say on the France 24 debate Facebook page, where you've been joining in on the conversation. We'll read one of your comments a little bit later on. Not to mention Twitter, where our handle here is at FrancoisF24. I want to begin, if possible, with remarks that were made earlier on Wednesday by the incoming boss of the European Central Bank. Mario Draghi warns that, quote, the solvency of sovereign states is no longer to be taken for granted, but has to be earned in the field with high and sustainable growth, which is only possible with public accounts in order. Eric Brice, the solvency of sovereign states no longer to be taken for granted. How much of a wake-up call is that where you are?
Well, I think we have made, with that statement, much of a progress, because so far what we've seen in terms of rescue plans were more targeted to a liquidity problem, ignoring, in fact, the very fact that we are facing an insolvency problem. So the very fact that...
break it down for us, the difference between a liquidity problem and an insolvency problem.
Well, basically, illiquidity means that, you have, a temporary discrepancy between, cash inflows and cash outflows. And basically, to help you cross the bridge, what you can do is lend money for a while to that person so that they can face the liquidity drag. Now, if you're insolvent, it means that your net wealth is basically negative. You owe more than what you own, and this is a totally different ball game. And so far, all the packages that have been proposed behaved as if it was an illiquidity problem, temporary problem that more or less will be solved in the short run. And it was more like a lend and pray position, hoping that the insolvency would not show up too drastically. Now, this statement shows that finally the right words are being used.
Finally, the right words are being used. Interesting what you say there. It's just money, the point there made. Up to now, people in Brussels often talking as though, we just need a bit of money to tide us over.
Well, one has to remember that what our colleague said, the reality has been ignored. I mean, by your rating agencies, by the market for 10 years. You had Greece equals Germany. It makes sense that the rates were lower because you didn't have any exchange rate premium. You didn't have any inflation premium to compensate for the risk, but there was no credit risk premium. But Greece and Germany were not the same. So it was ignored on that side. Second, as our colleague said, of course, giving money, lending money, in the hope that you will be repaid one day, you increase the debt. So you just address a liquidity problem. When you have low growth, high interest rates, and high debt from the start, you might suspect that there is more to, than that. And the third point I would like to add has to do also with ECB. Mr. Trichet, 2 or 3 days ago, reiterated something that he said a bit earlier. That is, maybe we should think about something like a European Ministry of Finance. In order to cope with that crisis, we have to plug a gap, which has been there for 12 years now, since the beginning of the euro.
So
that is, we lack fiscal federalism, and we are getting towards that very, very painfully, because you need the crisis to push forward, and the difficulties, the difference in speeches among all these politicians, all this mess, of course, doesn't help.
And so it's taken it for it to come to this, for people to really face the big picture. However, take a listen, for instance, to the word out of Dublin. They're feeling the sting a day after Moody's downgraded Ireland's credit rating to junk status. 10-year bonds there spiking to 14%. Take a listen to the reaction.
Well, it is very disappointing, clearly, and it makes our job that bit more difficult. But it doesn't reflect in any way a failure of government policy or a weakness in the Irish economy.
Tariq Michael, do you sense a tinge of denial in those words?
Denial, maybe there is some truth as well, because the situation in Ireland is very different from the situation in Greece. In Greece, you had the problem was the public sector. I mean, they lie on their national accounts, but and you know that in Ireland it was a problem from the banking sector. The government was forced to rescue the banking sector, and of course you can say that it was also the fault of the Irish government to have accepted to have this huge private banking sector in this country. If you compare the size of the Irish banking system before the crisis and the size of the economy, you have this huge difference. But I think it's true. I mean, I think they don't have a problem of competitivity. So in the long run, I think there is no solvency problem in Ireland.
They don't have a problem with competitiveness, but
they're not insolvent.
They're not insolvent, but they have a lot of debt, and it's the same for all of these countries that we've mentioned.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think maybe one thing that starting from the basics that we should mention is many people, even people in the markets, don't get it simply with the European public debt. And they cannot understand why the markets are so nervous with the European debt. When you have, like, if you take the European debt in aggregate, I think it's 85% of European GDP. If you look at the US, it's more than 100%. If you look at Japan, it's 235%. So what's the problem with the European debt? I mean, the problem is that people do not understand if it's a sovereign debt or not. Because if you take the US, if you take the UK, if you take Japan, there is not default risk, because they are indebted in their own currency and they have the control of the central bank. So they can always reimburse their debt. Of course, they can print money, they can do inflation, but you don't have default risk by definition, because it's a sovereign debt. And the situation in Europe is quite different, because you don't know when Greece is indebted, you don't know if it's Greece currency or not.
You're making the case for opting out of the euro here.
There is no Greece currency, there is the euro, it is their currency, so they are indebted in euros. The problem is Greece is seen, as France, Germany and all the others, as a country that might quit. If you have a problem in Florida, because it's a service-oriented state, it doesn't make a lot of huge unit labor cost cutting. Maybe there is more inflation. Maybe there is a deficit of Florida vis-à-vis the rest of the US. Nobody thinks Florida will quit the US, have its own central bank, etc. Why is that? because it's a one country and there is this kind of fiscal solidarity that doesn't exist with us. And we're going back to Mr. Trichet's remark and probably the dream of people like Delors, etc. in the past. This is one point. But coming back to what you just said before, the rating agencies, when it comes to, I don't want to open a debate about these agencies because it would be too long, but when you think about, okay, it's true, Ireland is not Greece. They are put in the same basket. Why? Because these rating agencies are not thinking only about the situation of Ireland. They say, okay, if Ireland needs another bailout, if Ireland if Mrs. Merkel or others are pushing in favor of a private sector participation to this bailout, that means a haircut for this private sector. So the private sector is creditors. And rating agencies are writing for these creditors, so you will lose.
All right,
so the political mess in Europe is as much as the situation in Ireland, I would say.
And with each country, there's a feeding frenzy. Turning to Italy, where markets steadied this Wednesday, we need to understand why a country where the deficit is smaller than France's, for instance, is now losing the confidence of investors. Eric Brice, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because a comparison was just being made with the US. And, you know, we used to say old Europe and young America. I would like to reverse the terms and say old America and young Europe. And basically what we see, and this was correctly pointed out by my two colleagues, is that somehow, do we really deserve that common currency? In fact, we have something that is quite an achievement, quite a significant political achievement, but all the necessary ingredients, all the tools, all the panoply that should have accompanied the common currency are not in place. And as long as things go well, that countries within the zone do not diverge, that there is some kind of discipline, that you don't have too many poor pupil compared to the good pupil, things can go pretty well, even though you're walking on eggs. The minute you have external shocks like the one we are experiencing, and we may experience even more because we have to pray that China won't experience a problem. The more we get into those troubles, the more we see tools that are lacking that would help solving. So you may call it a European Ministry of Finance. You may call it a federal government. You may call it Eurobonds or what have you. The fact of the truth is that we lack the proper tools. It's as if we were entering that Fukushima nuclear power plant, knowing about the disaster, but admitting that we don't have the tools because it's too late. We didn't manufacture them ahead of time. And as time passes by, then it's not so much the given picture of a given country at a given point in time that is worrying. It's the fact that because everybody is using the same currency, one degree of freedom is obviously lacking. If you have a country that is facing problem, in the good old days of multiple currencies, you could have a competitive devaluation. You can fix that by a falling currency. Export would adjust, and things hopefully would go back to normal. This option you don't have. And over the last 10 years, and we can understand why the Germans are so upset and so angry. Those guys, they did a great job trying to increase productivity gains, making sure that salaries would remain below those productivity gains, knowing that Deutschmark was no longer there, and the only way to compete and to be efficient in that kind of economy is to work hard and make productivity gains. So those guys are more equipped to weather the storm than the others who are now faced with a huge bill to pay And in terms of their economy, is it fit? Is it strong? Is it efficient? Is it ready to weather the storm? Certainly not. And that's what causes the problem. And in a nutshell, we have the worst part of mutualization. In fact, the common currency is some kind of mutualization. Fair enough. That's what the dollar is all about. And as Mr. Darvizonnet pointed out, it's not because Florida or California is experiencing a problem that the whole building is falling apart, because they have the good side of the mutualization principle. Here we don't have. We have fragmented areas. We have countries that don't show good examples. I live in this country, in Belgium. You see that they can't fix the government. So I can understand that markets, even though they play both sides.
A lack of political unity, as you say. We could maybe call up the evolution of the German, Greek, and Italian bond markets over the past 6 months. And if we see that chart, you can see how, if you start at point zero, where Greece has gone to today, 16.9%, Italy 5.5%, Germany 2.72%. And we talked about the lack of political cohesion. But Tariq Moukil, when you think about Germany, export-driven economy, as Eric Brice pointed out, where they kept wages at a stable level, it's not just political institutions; it's the politics of what they decide to do with their economy. Should there be a eurozone when you look at those? When you look at that problem?
That's a good question, because Boris mentioned German competitivity, that in his view it could be part of the solution. I think in the current crisis, German competitivity was part of the problem, because you know that by the game of twin deficits, the public deficit of many European countries of the periphery are linked to their foreign deficit with Germany. And
to trade imbalance.
To the trade imbalance with Germany.
So should there be a eurozone under these circumstances?
Yes, I deeply believe that the eurozone is a good thing, but the
why
thing
is that?
Because it decreases costs of trade between countries, and I think as well that more like in a political way, it's a good thing it's a first step to build. I deeply believe that a federal Europe.
We're going to have to take a break in 30 seconds. But how do you sell Europe politically today when we've talked about all these imbalances? How do you sell it to voters?
What is the current account of a trade imbalance between north of France and Aquitaine? Do we know it? No. Do we know the trade balance between Florida, the example like maybe, and Massachusetts? Well, no, we don't. There is not a problem. The problem is there because there is not enough political integration.
And can voters understand that?
Yeah. And second, I will answer, but second, what was just said, suppose now that everybody is trying to export, to live, to grow, with exporting to its neighbor. What happens? Everybody is cutting wages and you have a depression. So you have a dream that having Germany everywhere doesn't make sense.
When we come back, we'll expand on this point. Stay with us. The France 24 debate continues.
Watch all of France 24 on France24.com. It now features more content and is quicker and easier to use. 24 hours a day, wherever you are, visit our website and catch up on all the latest news. Watch the channel in high definition. Pause live TV and watch programs from the past 24 hours at the click of a button. Find our reports, programs and web documentaries in seconds. All of France 24 in French, English and Arabic on France24.com. The Muslim Brotherhood is no longer afraid to show its face. The movement, banned in Egypt since 1954, has been allowed to establish its own political party to run in next September's parliamentary elections. Their influence continues to grow, thanks to their charity work, which includes providing aid and free education to the poor. But who are they really? Does the Brotherhood really seek a democratic future in Egypt? Reporters, Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Paris time on France 24.